Hey, Rodney. It's good to see you. My screen is off, but I see you at the Breakfast Club all the time. Thank you, Karen. Yes, if you need any interpreting service, just let us know and we'll get that video spotlighted so that way it is easily available for you. We're going to give it just a couple more minutes just because I show several people have it on their agenda, and give it just a few more minutes to get started. Happy Friday to you as well. Thank you for joining us. We're excited for a big day 3. Okay, well, for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and get this kicked off, and we'll let other attendees in as we get going. My name is Lainey. I am the Finance and Marketing Coordinator here at DRA. If you want more information on all the work we do at DRA, you can visit our website. I'll drop that in the chat here in just a little bit. I'm going to be your host and your moderator today. So if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. Thank you for joining us again. We are super excited to be here with Jennifer Goodwin, Jen, and staff. She is our staff attorney, and then Molly Hernandez. She's an advocate here at DRA. They are going to talk with us today about transition planning for school-age youth. We've got a lot of great information. Jen, I'm going to turn it over to you. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to give you a couple housekeeping notes real quick. If you didn't notice, you are muted upon entry. If you will just please make sure to keep your audio muted so that we make sure to get the most out of the session. And Jen, now I'm going to turn it over to you. Feel free to share your screen.
Yes. If you'll quit sharing screen, then I can add mine in, Lainey.
You're good to go.
All right, sounds good. Get this up. All right, hello everyone, and thanks for sticking with us on a Friday afternoon. It's good to see you guys. So my name's Jen, and as she said, I'm one of the attorneys here at DRA and get to be joined with Molly, one of our advocates here, and we kind of work as a team in the CAP program, so the Client Assistance Program, with working with all kinds of different things that we have with people trying to get back to work, people with disabilities get back to work, and some of the roadblocks that they have there. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the law today, but I just kind of want to give a quick overview before we get going into it too hard as well. So the transition services, because I've had so many people ask me, okay, well, what are you talking about with transition services? So basically what that is, it's for kids who are in junior high, high school, whenever they're trying to figure out what they want to be when they grow up, basically. So, you know, you start asking people, well, what do you want to do after high school? And so a lot of people have that plan and they know exactly, you know, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a fireman, I want to be whatever. And so our kids with disabilities need to be asked those questions as well. And so what the transition plan is it's actually a formal plan of sitting down and having a team together to discuss not only what you want to be whenever you're done with school or where you want to go, what your plans are, but also all the steps that you need to take to get there. So being able to take the right courses and have some job experience and, learn what jobs are out there and what's available and what kind of accommodations that you'll need and what can help you to get there. And so there's all sorts of different resources that are out there that people have no idea about. So that's just a little bit of what we're going to touch on today. Molly, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everybody. I'm Molly. I am an advocate with disability rights, as Jen said. And anyhow, today's presentation, we know it's titled Law. I'm not an attorney. I'm much more fun than that. So I want to make sure that this is a relaxed, it's an informative conversation, that you guys get to kind of get an idea of the law that supports what you need to become a full part of your community. And part of that is achieving competitive integrated employment. You're going to hear us toss that term around a lot, but you're also going to hear Jen and I share our stories of disability as well. We have a lot of experience with vocational rehabilitation, with living in the community with a disability. Our disabilities did take place after transition age. So we actually don't have that lived experience, but we do have a kind of applied knowledge through our casework, but also, in retrospect, how things might have been different for us. So you're going to hear us sprinkle in a lot of ourselves, because I think sometimes that's the best way to connect what we do to maybe what you're experiencing. So, I hope you don't get too much of us, but I do hope you learn a lot as we go through this.
Absolutely. All right. So straight to the law. So basically, what is WIOA? So it's the Workforce Innovations Opportunity Act, and it came into law in 2014, and then the parts that pertain to the education actually came about in 2016. So the purpose of it is to empower individuals with disabilities to maximize employment, economic self-sufficiency, independence, and inclusion and integration into society. So it's basically to get even people with disabilities into the workforce and show them that they can be included in everyday jobs with all sorts of different people. And there is a place and there's a job for everyone. And with the right accommodations, then it can happen.
Right. And like looking at this, when you see WIOA, that is the most recent evolution of the Rehab Act of 1973. And you'll hear that. But honestly, vocational rehabilitation legislation dates way back to the early 1900s, even from after the Industrial Revolution. People were having a lot of accidents related to their work, and it was how to assist those people with either returning to work or how they could live post-injury, as a result of a work injury. And then it evolved because we had World War I and World War II, and we were bringing home soldiers. And with each evolution, vocational rehabilitation looked to expand and serve more people because there are so many kinds of disabilities. So WIOA just took that even a step further and was like, look, it's if you listened in yesterday to education, the earlier you help people, the better the outcome. So getting those Voc Rehab services to meet the world of special education and get a plan going and in place so that students know that, hey, I'm going to be something, I'm going to do something, that's important. That's a big deal. So the law is there to support that. It's there to help. It will divert funding to make sure it's there to help these kids. So that's where, we want to make sure that, the law is in place to support these things.
Ronnie does have a really good point in the chat as well. But it's also to help take care of your healthcare needs or to attend higher education. So it's not just going straight into the workforce as well. So,
absolutely. We're looking at what comes next, what comes after high school. So if you want to go to that 4-year plan or beyond, absolutely, to support those needs. Or if you want to go more just a technical training route, there are so many options post high school. It's just keeping that in mind.
Okay. So we are, or the WIOA is bringing people together. So core programs that maybe had worked individually before, but it's put them all together. So employment and training services for adults, dislocated workers and youth. It's the, we've been laughing over the name of this, the Wagner-Pazer Act. And you can say that in all sorts of different accents. So I will let you choose your own, but for employment services. So it's kind of a one-stop employment services delivery system, adult education and literacy programs, and then vocational rehab, which is a state grant program that's going to assist individuals with disabilities in obtaining their employment.
And so I think that one's pretty much, you went over it well, Jen. It's just, again, making sure that all these services are available and addressing the specific needs that are out there.
Okay, and so just trying to throw out some links for where you can find some more information on the WIOA and actually the act, all that sort of stuff. So those will be out there in the slides. So you're welcome to check those out at your convenience. So why is it important? So you're looking at, secondary students, so kids that are in high school, essentially, with disabilities. So it means that they're going to have, the students with disabilities are going to have meaningful opportunities to receive the training and other supports needed to achieve meaningful employment and outcomes after they leave high school. And so PREETS, which is
Pre-employment education transition services.
There we go. It's the earliest set of Voc Rehab services a student can access to. So it's, I've had clients call me and they said, well, we called Voc Rehab and they said that they don't take clients until they're 18, which is not accurate for one, but also this allows them to get in there and get services at the earliest possible point too in the Voc Rehab process. So our local education agencies, which are our LEAs, are still responsible to pay for transition services that are also considered special education. So it gets a little confusing on whether it's going to be the school paying for it or Voc Rehab for different things, but it just shows that they can work together and still both have responsibilities there.
Yeah, I think this is where you start to kind of mentally assemble your team. Who do you need at the table as you're looking to establish your transition plan? So yeah, I think early on making connections and starting to establish who can be of best service in the right situation. So go ahead, Jen.
Okay, so WIOA is Title IV. And some of the changes that include, so it changed from the definitions and expectations for competitive integrated employment for students with disabilities with VR support. So pre-employment transition services for all students with an IEP or a 504 plan in school. I think that gets overlooked a lot. A lot of people think that it's just for kiddos with IEPs, but it can also be for students that have a 504 plan. So 504 plans are often used more for people with physical disabilities that don't necessarily need special education services, those sorts of things, but they also should be receiving a transition plan. So to figure out what's next. And it also changed the restrictions on placement into sub-minimum wage facility-based programs of students with disabilities. So it actually restricted that. So it made it to where you actually need to go into a job where you're going to get full wages.
And that's part of that competitive integrated employment. You're going to hear us say a lot. Competitive means a competitive wage. Integrated means working alongside non-disabled peers. And unfortunately, when you look at sub-minimum wage settings, a lot of time, well, of course, it is not a competitive wage and you are not really integrated into a work setting with non-disabled peers. So, we want to see people with disabilities represented out in the community, out in work settings. So, and Jen, I don't know, is this an appropriate time for me to kind of talk a little bit about, how I ended up where I am? And okay. All right. So again, like I said, we're going to sprinkle in bits and pieces of ourselves in here. If you listened to yesterday's closing respect segment, you'll have heard a little of this. When I was a teenager, I started experiencing some vision issues that resulted in a diagnosis of a degenerative retinal disease that ultimately caused my blindness later in adulthood. So this is where I had a degenerative disease. So I never knew quite where I fit. I went from being perfectly normal, as I thought, to suddenly having a diagnosis that we didn't know where it would end up. So I never knew where that world of disability began, okay, where exactly I fit in it. So for me, I tried to accommodate best I could, because I didn't think, hey, I can go to my university and ask for the disability support services. I didn't think that was me. I had a diagnosis, but I didn't know, I was making adjustments on my own. I wasn't asking for help because I couldn't even really explain what I needed. And part of that was because I didn't know the supports that were out there. So anyhow, I went on, I graduated from college with a degree in speech language pathology. Unfortunately, you need a master's degree to practice in that. I didn't get my master's degree because I was having to restrict any driving I did because of my vision loss. So again, I'm having to make big changes without support. So instead of getting a degree, getting that master's degree, I did a hard pivot and I became certified as an elementary school teacher. I thought, well, once I get to school, I'm not going to have to drive. And so I loved that, loved my kids. So it was a great, great time in my life. Unfortunately, because we have not seen that representation out in the larger community of people with disabilities working in all settings. And that is my ultimate goal till the last breath I take, is to see people represented in all settings. Because once my vision deteriorated to a certain point, and explaining those years in between would be an entire another session about learning to deal with gradual disability. But anyhow, once I got to the point that it was so hard to continue doing what I did, and I didn't know how to ask for accommodations, I quit. Because guess what? I'd never seen a blind teacher. I assumed there weren't blind teachers. That's just something, it was time for me to go home, because to be perfectly honest, I hadn't really seen many blind people out in the community. So I thought, well, that's where you go home when you have a disability. And that is so wrong. And I don't want that to ever happen again to other people. I know it happens frequently, but that's why I do the work I do. I also, and this is one quick aside for any teachers that are on this, the biggest regret I have is hiding my disability from my students. They needed to see me overcome, not quit. So again, I think there's times that we can teach resilience and, use your experiences. Don't burden people, inspire people. So that is all to say, when supports are in place, people can stay and represent in the community how they can contribute. And disability is, I like to refer to disability visibility. We got to be out there. We've got to be seen. So if I had stayed teaching, maybe there's a kid out there that would have seen a blind teacher that might be following, having the same issues, and end up in the workplace. So that's kind of a shortened story. And I know that's a sidestep, but I think we have to sprinkle these in so you understand the importance of recognizing that, okay, maybe I wouldn't have at that time have been considered a student with an IEP. I could have been a student with a 504. I could have had support services in place. Hindsight's 2020, but also I won't date myself, but a lot of these things were not in place those many years ago. I'm just going to try and insert my narrative of how things could have been different if we applied it to today's standards. So, okay, Jen, that's my thing.
All right. My computer likes to sometimes move slides. There we go. So basically IDEAs. So you hear that talked about in the school setting all the time. And so basically it's the provision of FAPE, which is a free and appropriate public education. So the primary purpose of IDEA is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them free and appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. So
that's a lot of words. What I like to think of it as meaning is meet kids where they are, give them what they need.
Exactly. And it's amazing to me working as an education attorney. So often I see schools being resistant to IEP plans for students. And it's very frustrating. Oftentimes they're wanting to just discipline them for some of their behaviors. They're wanting to say, oh, well, they cognitively don't need services, they don't need resource services, but then they have behaviors that are affecting their education, those sorts of things, and they're not giving them any services to help them at that point. And so schools are resistant to giving an IEP. That's one of the things I love is going into those schools and sit down at the table. Everyone's against this child, and then we sit down at the table. We talk about the services that should be in place under FAPE for them to have a good, appropriate education. And then all of a sudden, they put some supports in place for this child, and it's amazing. Now they can learn. Now they're not acting out near as often in class. They have what they need to be successful in school and to be successful in like social activities, all that sort of stuff. And then whenever we come back to the table, oftentimes those conversations are very different. So anyway, but moving on to transition planning. So basically when this needs to happen. So it needs to start when a student is 14 or even younger, if you've got someone with maybe more severe disabilities, anything like that, so that it's going to take longer to implement the plan. There's going to be more goals involved too. But 14 at a minimum, you need to start looking at it. It needs to be individualized and based on the student's strengths. Here's a big one, preferences and interest as well. And needs to include opportunities to develop functional skills for work and for community life.
Yeah, so the points, was that every bullet point, Jen? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. And you guys, like I said, I'm blind and I have turned off my screen reader because sometimes it can interfere with me hearing Jen. So if I sound like I'm rude and cutting her off, it's accidental. So anyhow, looking at that age 14, that's a big deal because there's a lot of questions. Sometimes you hear 14, sometimes you hear that people won't get involved until age 16. You need to start planning at 14. I honestly want kids being career aware far ahead of that time. But when we're looking at the logistics at 14, we need to start that transition plan. They say, especially if you're looking at kids that are a high dropout potential, make sure it's a robust plan started at that point, that you're giving something to inspire and motivate them. And as Jen said, strengths based. So many times we are struck with our limitations. And look, no one's more aware of their limitations than the person with the disability. Let's look at our strengths, our aptitudes, our interests, and that is what drives the transition plan, okay? Because what we're looking at is what comes after high school. So let the student determine that, let them lead that. Obviously kids need guidance. I'm going to mention a couple of times through this. I've got an 8th grader going up into 9th grade. Things change, we guide. Okay. So, but just keep in mind, many things are case specific. Okay. But you need to be aware that by 14, it's time to start planning. That transition plan needs to be included in with the IEP.
And I'm going to sprinkle in a little bit of my life at this point too. So like Molly said, neither one of us, whenever our disabilities happened, were in the transition planning stage, but it doesn't change that we both went through transitions in our lives too. And just pointing out the strengths and the preferences and the interests, all that sort of stuff, and how important that is. So just to give you a little background on who I am and where I came from, first of all, I want to counter it with what kind of transition planning I was looking at before, when I was in high school. Because if you asked me then, I would have told you I was going to be a doctor, I was going to be married and have 4 babies by the time I was 30. So I was doing things during that transition plan. And by the way, if you told me I couldn't, I told you to hide and watch. But, things change. So, but during those years, I was, taking honors courses, and I was in the counselor's office all the time, filling out scholarship applications. I needed to get into a good school, and I needed to have help paying for it. And was taking ACT prep courses, all that sort of stuff, so that I could get my ACT score as high as possible. And I was making those plans for what that was going to look like. And ultimately, I got to college and ended up with a marketing degree and became a drug rep, which was super fun. And it was a great life as well. And then for me at 25, I got in a boat with the wrong person on the wrong day and ended up having a spinal cord injury. So C5 and 6 quadriplegia changes your life goals and your life plans, and also your strengths as well. So I knew laying flat on a bed in ICU without being able to move arms or anything else on my body at that point, that being a drug rep was probably not in the cards for me going forward from there. So I needed to have a transition in my life as well. And so while it wasn't your traditional, what you think of, it's very similar, it's very parallel in what I experienced as well. Because then I had to start looking at, okay, well, what are going to be my goals? And so I knew my initial goal was going to be able to walk. It was going to be to get back to work. I wanted to be able to get back to my job. I wanted to be able to get back to the house I'd bought and independent living and all of those sorts of things. But it was going to take a lot of steps to get there. And so I started looking at that, trying to figure out which steps were first and what were possible and what were going to be long-term goals. And so the first things I had to figure out were, okay, well, what rehab am I going to go to? Am I going to stay here where I have friends and family and support? Or am I going to look into some of the top spinal cord rehabs in the country? So ultimately, I kind of did both. I did my initial rehab here because I needed that support. And then I went off to Shepherd Center later. And so I knew that I wanted to be independent. So I started working on learning how to drive. So I had those therapists, those OTs and PTs that were right there beside me. And we all had a plan. That was the other thing. In the hospital, we even sat around with OTs, PTs, doctors, my parents, and me, most importantly, that we came up with a plan for what I was going to do and how I was going to do it. And that plan had to be adjusted and changed as we went, but that was all part of it. And a big part of it is that I was the center of that, making those decisions and having those goals. And so ultimately for me, I went on, I did rehab. I told everybody for a long time that rehab was my job. I told people I was retired at 25, which was kind of fun. My niece got a kick out of that, telling everybody that Aunt Jenny was tired, which was also true. And then I built an accessible home. And so I was able to learn how to live on my own again. I lived next door to my parents because I'd had to move in with them initially when my injury happened. But then I got to the point where even using my wheelchair and being quadriplegic, I was able to build an accessible home and I learned to live in it. And then I was sitting there thinking, okay, well, what's next? And so I still knew that the job that I had before wasn't completely feasible for me, being in and out of a car, 10 stops a day, all over the state. But I decided, I could probably go to law school. I could be a lawyer. That would work, right? So then I got into taking the LSAT and started talking to vocational rehab. They were actually the people who helped with the conversion on my car. So they were a part of my story as well. And honestly, because I didn't have a transition plan and I wasn't doing it during that time, I walked into rolled into their office and said, hey, I don't know what you guys do, but I'm here and I got your phone number from somebody. So what do you do? And I ended up walking out or strolling out with them, offering to help modify a car for me so that I could get back to driving. And that was a huge step in my independence and that independent living piece. And then that could have helped me with going back to school. So I ultimately decided to go to law school, and I had to work with the Disability Resource Center through UALR that was going to help me with accommodations in law school. So while it wasn't during my high school years, I definitely went through this whole transition process as well. So there's a little piece of my world. Okay. And I think we hit this just a little bit, at least the emphasis on it, on who needs to be involved. So number one is the student themselves, and then the student's parents and the IEP team. So that consists of any special ed or a special ed teacher, a gen ed teacher, an administrator, all different groups of people that need to be at the table. And then also Arkansas Rehab Services. It might be different groups. It might be Easter seals that need to be there. It might be some independent living centers. Any of those sorts of places that are going to be a part of your transition plan need to be at the table.
And of course, most important is that number one, we like to call it the VIP of the IEP. We've got our person there that this is all about. And what better time to teach, hopefully earlier it's been taught, but strengthen those self-advocacy skills. These are the times where, the student, the person with the disability is going to be saying, this is me, this is who I am, this is what I want. Within the disability community, we like to say nothing about us without us. So respect that and always make sure that the person that this revolves around is fully involved.
Yes. Okay, and then reality. What does this really look like? So, as I mentioned before, I'm in IEP meetings and have lots of clients who are at this stage in life too. And so often I'll ask them, well, have you done a transition plan? And the number one answer that I get is, well, I don't know. And that's always alarming to me because it should be on the forefront of everyone's mind, just what the next plans are. And so, and everybody needs to be working towards those goals as well.
Yeah, and time flies. We get it. It's like I said, I've got a kid that's going to be starting high school next year, and all of a sudden it's here, it's at our doorstep. And what comes next will be here in the blink of an eye as well. So it's not a can you can kick down the road. It's something to address. And, in later slides, we're going to talk about how that begins to unfold and what it's going to look like. But just remember, it needs to be a part. Ask about it. We're going to try and, give you guys the steps to get this going.
Yes. And so we've got a great website as well that I'm going to share here. Let's see if I can get it to click on it for me. So I actually want to show what a transition plan looks like. So, and you guys might want to take note, this Arkansas Transition Services, they have a great website with tons of resources. And one of the things that I love is looking at the student resources.
Hey, Jen, you may have to share a different tab. If you've already pulled up, it's not pulling up on our screen.
Okay. Let me see. Hang on. Can you see this?
Still see the slides, sorry.
Okay, let me do, if I do stop share, will it let me go in there again? Maybe. I don't know. Okay, I don't know that it's going to let me share that then. Still not seeing it?
Let me see if I can pull it up on mine for you. See if that'll help. What number slide is that?
Probably about 8. It just says transition plan and has a link.
No, I can't get it up either. But we can, what I'll do is if you'll, you could drop the link in the chat. Good job. Thank you, Shay, for that. And then they can pull it up as well in their own time.
Okay, let me get back. I don't think it's going to let me copy and paste that either right now. We will get it in there to you guys at some point, but that transition plan website is great. So also on it, so it's going to be looking at things. It pretty much just asks, okay, so what are your employment goals in the future and what are your strengths right now? And Okay.
And these are student-owned documents. And by that, I mean, the student is taking ownership. We've got some I statements in there. What can I do? I will, those are things that we like to see.
Yes, and so it starts putting out goals for each one of those. So it also looks at independent living goals and what you want to do with that. And it has each goal and what year that it should be done by and who should be helping to implement that. And each one of those too. Another thing that's offered on their page as well is, all right, so you've got it up there now. Lainey, is that right? Yes. Perfect. Can you guys see it now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And do I have control? Or do you have control?
I've got it pulled up on my screen.
Okay, so you'll have control of it as well. So just scroll down just a little bit so we can see down here where it says present level of academic achievement. So that's where you're putting in what you can do now and what your strengths and those sorts of things are and all of that. And then one thing that I wanted to highlight as well is this transfer of rights. So in Arkansas, at least a year before a student turns 18, they need to be given some documentation to let them know that the rights for this student are going to transfer from the parent to the student upon their 18th birthday. And so that's something that, everyone at the table needs to be aware of as well. So that way, after that, then it's going to be completely up to the student on all kinds of different decisions at that point. Because once they turn 18, they're an adult. And usually that's going to happen typically in the senior year. So it's going to come into play for most of the students that are out there as well. You can scroll down a little bit, Lainey. Okay, so those are just the assessments and things that have already been done. And then right below that, it's talking about post-secondary career and employment goals. And so that way, it's just after high school, I will. And then how you get to that point. And so anyway, that's just what that transition plan looks like. So if you're digging through an IEP and you see something that looks like that, that's your transition plan. So pull it out, have a look at it, and see where you're at.
And certain things, make sure, if there's are things that you can provide, like documents like this, to discuss with your student before the meeting. I'm not saying that every student's going to want to go in and be an active participant. I mean, you're going to get the kids that are looking down, don't want to pay attention. But if they can be armed and equipped with some documentation, with some stuff that they can pass out and they can provide when they're sitting at the table, again, it gives that element of control to them and lets them it's their narrative. So let them be prepared. Going into any meeting without preparation is hard. So that's why these resources are out there, and they're fantastic resources to explore and utilize.
And like Molly was saying, actually, on the transition plan website that we were just talking about, they have a specific tab for the student, and it's what to expect in your IEP. And it gives boxes for them to fill in on who's going to be there and what they think their strengths are and what they think their weaknesses are, so they can go to the table armed with something in writing, even in front of them too. So just a really nice resource.
Yeah, it's a great resource. I think it was dropped in the chat, but also it's just linked through the Arkansas Department of Education. So it's a fantastic thing that's out there. It can be utilized. So, make sure your kid's prepared. That's a big thing, and that teaches them a lesson in life. Preparedness is key.
All right, moving along. So provisions of pre-employment transition services. WIOA states that youth with disabilities will receive extensive pre-employment transition services so they can successfully obtain competitive integrated employment. WIOA tells us that schools are responsible for provision of pre-eds in collaboration with vocational rehab. And here's a big one. Vocational rehab state agencies will set aside, and this is a big number, whenever you think about their budget every year, 15% of their annual funding to provide transition services to youth with disabilities. So that was a big change at WIOA. Before, they maybe helped a little, but it was not near as much as 15% of the annual budget. And then vocational rehab in schools will have coordinated planning and service delivery strategies through the individualized plan for employment and the individualized education plan. And they did not make that confusing enough with an IP and IEP. So if you can keep that straight on a daily basis, I'm super proud for you.
Yeah, Jen and I live in both worlds, and we're constantly tongue-tied over it. So, and while we're throwing it out there about the acronyms, IEPs, EIPs, all the things that, you know, it's crazy. So you can, and I believe the Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities actually has this linked on their page. It's an alphabet soup. It goes over a lot of relevant acronyms within special education and disability resources. So I'm not sure it's still out there, but familiarize yourself with acronyms, because we live in the world of them, and it really helps when you're sitting at the table. And we all do it. We throw the letters out and then realize we haven't explained it to someone. So if you're a teacher also, I think it's a great idea to have something typed up that explains those and hand them out to parents. You start to believe everyone's speaking a different language when you're on the opposite side of the table.
And that absolutely happens in IEP meetings all the time. So anyway, and you don't want your parents or your student to feel like they're the only one at the table who doesn't know what's happening. So, okay. Competitive integrative employment. So WIOA also included new rules about transition services to place students in community-based minimum wage jobs. So youth 14 to 24 can no longer go directly into employment paying a sub-minimum wage, which is typically in a facility-based pre-vocational setting, such as you may have heard the term sheltered workshop. And WIOA requires working with VR First to place the youth in a competitive integrated employment setting.
Yeah, and I think we just touched on that before. Representation in the community, that's what everyone wants. So it's that integrated employment at a competitive wage. So that's our goal. That's where we want to get these kids.
Yes. Okay, it also strengthened the collaboration between the local education agencies and the vocational rehab. So pre-employment transition services, so the PREETs that we keep talking about, must be provided or arranged in collaboration with the schools, your local education agencies. PREETs are the only activities that can be paid for with the funds reserved under 110D1 of the Rehabilitation Act. And students and families must be connected to VR earlier in their school careers, so the job seekers acquire skills and credentials to meet the needs of employers.
I got nothing else on that one. It is what it is.
Moving right along. So there are 5 required activities that are considered the PREETs. So the first one is job exploration and counseling.
Are we going to take these? Sorry, Jen. Do we have a slide for each one of these after the fact, or do we need to break them apart as we go through this slide?
Break them down after this.
Okay.
So job exploration counseling, work-based learning experiences, counseling on opportunities for transition or post-secondary education or higher educational programs, workplace readiness training to develop the social skills and the independent living skills, such as your home and community skills, and instruction in self-advocacy, which may also include peer mentoring. All right, job exploration counseling. Molly, do you want to go through that?
Sure. Is there anything else on the slide?
Sure. So those include things like vocational interest inventory, current labor market, non-traditional jobs, in-demand industries and occupations, self-assessment to identify career pathways of interest to the student, relevance of high school courses to future careers, career fairs, guest speakers, career and technical student organizations, matching skills and qualifications to be successful, and career counseling.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is kind of, a lot of that is self-explanatory, but I want to put it in kind of a real world context, real world setting. So some of these provisions through WIOA of the different things that will be addressed in transition, this first one, job exploration, they can easily be handled in a group setting. Some things will be one-on-one and very individualized. Some things can be handled in a group setting. So job exploration, a lot of elements of it can be done in a group setting. So for instance, I've mentioned my 8th grader before. Right now, he's in a class called Career Exploration. And I remember a zillion years ago when I was in junior high doing a similar class called Career Orientation. So what that is kind of explaining what's out there, what's in the job market today. That's where these kids, you can start to get a feel of, okay, what do they like? What drives their passion? So that class, it has a purpose. It's not just an easy A, as I've told my son repeatedly, put some effort into this, draw something out of it, because right now we're in the process of doing his course plan for next year. So we're drawing upon that. And what was funny was, even on his registration, which, we're handling everything online, there was another link to a career exploration assessment, just a tool, basically an interest inventory, so that as we're registering for next year, we can choose some electives that are going to drive his career path, his course load for at least the next year. Things change. We know kids make different choices. Who knows what I wanted to be when I was going into 9th grade. I didn't even know rehabilitation counseling or advocacy for people with disabilities existed. So, those classes, those are important. And chances are, if you've got a student coming out of 8th grade or possibly a 9th grader, those classes are there. Pull that information, utilize it as you're working on this transition plan. Ask them questions about it. Some other things, and this is a big deal for me. I do have a degree in rehabilitation counseling. After I quit teaching, I didn't just quit. Clearly, I'm here. It did take a few years to develop some soft skills and stuff, and be like, okay, I'm ready to put myself out there again. But I've been the student with the disability now as well. I was the teacher of students with disabilities. Then I became the student with the disability. So in my coursework, I had to take an assessments class. And one of the things I had to do was go to a university, not my own, and go to their career services and say, hey, could I use one of your career exploration tools? And it's really interesting. You actually kind of get a map to make sure, are you following your passion? They'll do personality assessments to see if your personality matches, the things that you want to do. So, which it worked out well. I was glad to see that when I was just about to graduate, it lined up with what my testing showed. So that was a plus. But those things are out there. Did I do it when I was an undergrad and right out of high school? No, I didn't utilize those tools. Tell your kids to use them, disabled or non-disabled. It really will help narrow the path. It will drive instruction. In the education world, we like to say assessment that drives instruction. That's an assessment tool. It can drive how you're planning your course load throughout school, the things that you're doing. Career fairs, just being out, being exposed. Go to a career fair, see what's out there. Or when you're with your student or your child, look around at the jobs and just point them out. Say, hey, that looks like an interesting thing. Would you like to do that? Wonder what it would take to become that. Let them know that they can be out there. And of course, you do have to be realistic, but I still love being aspirational. What you want to do. I know I couldn't be a race car driver. I get that. I'm blind, but it's only a few things were eliminated by that. There's so many things that I can do and people with disabilities can do. There was a quote by Vice President Harris that I do not know, so I shouldn't even call it a quote. But at one point she said something about, just because you haven't seen it done before, you haven't seen someone like you do it before, doesn't mean it can't be done. So I always remember to empower with that. So anyhow, that's my spiel on job exploration. It can be done in many capacities through actual assessments or just going out there, looking around, asking questions. So, okay, Jen.
All right. So the next one is going to be work-based learning experiences. So assessment of work relevant skills, independence at work, workplace tours, simulated workplace experiences, career mentorships, career assessments, work-related training, apprenticeships, internships, paid work experiences, job shadowing, career mentorships, informational interviews, and service learning. So I actually have a little background in some of this stuff personally as well. In high school and in college and in law school as well, I did a school to work program in each of those settings. So in high school, I went to work at the bank and I got high school credit for it and got paid, and it was great. So I learned lots of job skills there. In college, I kind of did the same thing. Worked at a camera store in sales and worked great towards my business degree and taught me so much about the selling process and being in business, all of that sort of stuff. And then I actually did an externship during law school at Disability Rights Arkansas. And, that's what brought me back here, because it showed me what different opportunities were out there. I didn't know that disability law existed, really, even as a person with a disability in law school. So it was really eye-opening just to see those work experiences put into play in my life, for sure.
Yeah, and I think a lot of relationship building happens on a variety of levels when you're looking at these work experiences. A lot of work needs to be done either through the school or through Voc Rehab to kind of facilitate relationships, to get students' feet in the door so that they can go in and try these things out and see, what they're good at, what they enjoy, what they don't enjoy, where some of the what we call soft skills need to be improved. These are things that, again, it motivates students. So to make sure these things happen, it's great. This is where I also want to briefly touch on where it says like paid internships, paid work experiences. I know that so many students and their families depend on disability benefits. So this is where that you want to make sure that conversation happens. It's out there that, yes, there are work incentives available, but you don't want to risk losing a benefit that someone needs. So make sure that dialogue is open with the Social Security Administration, if that's, who the provider of the benefit is, and work incentives coordinators, counselors, those are people who are out there to explain and kind of debunk some myths related to what happens if you earn anything. So, you don't want someone to avoid a work experience out of fear. So knowledge is power.
There are great programs that do allow students to work too. You just have to have the right questions, the right people on board.
Right.
All right, counseling and post-secondary education. So this is looking at career pathways, transition planning, learning style assessments, learning styles and preferences, post-secondary training options, applying for vocational rehab services, applying for community services, accommodations that you'll need to support your post-secondary education, attending college fairs and tours, assistive technology profiles, knowing your community resources, military options, and college affordability and benefits planning.
Right. So this is when we're kind of pulling away from things that can be done in more of a group setting. It's very, clearly you're getting very individualized with a lot of this. So again, just so much of it is keeping the student involved, building that team of the people that they need to talk to, the counselors, not just school counselors, but vocational rehabilitation counselors. The student at this point, the Voc Rehab should be on the team as well, or at least, the student should be on their radar. These are things where the more people who are involved, the more collaborative the effort, the better the outcomes. So we just want to provide these for you all to see. These are the things that should be happening, and again, we're talking about when we say, hey, do you have a transition plan? These are the things that are in that transition plan.
Yes. All right, workplace readiness training to develop social skills and independent living. So these are things such as employability or your soft skills. So things such as communication, having a positive attitude, being able to work as a team, conflict resolution, being respectful, and professionalism. Independent living skills such as time management, your hygiene skills, nutrition and meal prep, use of transportation, using a cell phone, community safety skills, appropriate dress and behavior, and accessing the community. So other things are included are job seeking skills, your civic responsibilities, home and community safety, interpersonal skills, orientation mobility assessments, financial literacy, knowing your Social Security benefits, and looking.
Okay, so to me, this one is huge. Sorry, can you hear me, Jen?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, just making sure. This one is huge. Okay, disabled, non-disabled alike, kids in this age group, they need these skills. They need this awareness. This is when I, with my kids, do the put down your cell phone and make eye contact talk, okay? These are just those skills that everyone needs in order to be successful and a welcome part of the community, okay? So for instance, with my disability, this is where we're going to tie it back a little bit to what I went through. Like I said, I quit teaching, I left, I went home. I didn't know how I fit. I didn't know what to do. I needed soft skills, okay? Yes, I had held down a job before. I knew about professional and appropriate dress, things like that. What I needed were some of those very, very important independent living skills, like how to safely navigate outside my home. I suddenly, well, of course not suddenly, it was gradual, but I had to figure out, how do I use a cane to navigate my community? How do I pay at the grocery store when I can't see the touch screen to enter in my PIN number? You know, all of these little skills, those are the ones that bring you back into the community. So for kids who have been living at home, that mom and dad have always been right there and helping, you may need to really take a step back and get some training. I was very excited. I don't know if any of you were in on the session, but the Rock City Metro session. You know, one thing that they offer is that they will do some transportation, let you explore the bus, things like that. Teaching your kids, you know, because not everyone's a driver. I am not a driver. You know, we have to learn alternative means of transportation. You know, these cannot be overlooked when you're preparing to have a kid exit the high school setting and go out into the real world. So please make sure, although this in some ways, it almost seems as an afterthought on the soft skills, I want to see the soft skills listed first. I mean, it's a big deal. Without learning some of those independent living skills, soft skills, you got to get those in place first before you can just say, all right, go get a job. It's a big deal, and it needs to be well addressed in the plan.
I just remember, from a personal standpoint, for me, going back to law school, I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is as close to kindergarten as I'll ever get, because it was the first time post-injury that I was going completely on my own somewhere, and I didn't know anyone. So I had to meet all new friends. I had to depend on strangers at that point with anything that I might need help with. And I had to navigate a new school and trying to figure out how to ask for the things that I needed, because my school was not accessible when I got there. And they worked with me a lot, but I had to be independent enough to ask for those things too. So, and I mean, we're talking about a lot of the physical side of things, but we've got lots of kids with, you know, cognitive disabilities as well. And so maybe they need to know more the social side of things, as far as how to have conversations and appropriate conversations, both with their bosses, but also with their peers too, so that there's not going to be conflict on the job and those sorts of things. So really, and those are the things that you don't necessarily think about whenever you're looking at skills that people need. You kind of just assume that people have self-awareness and those sorts of things, but that's not always the case. And some of those things can be taught and can be shown how to move forward in that area.
Yeah, I think, again, we're going to spend a lot of time on this right now, because this is where we're talking about self-advocacy in it with as well, you know, making sure that your child, your student has the ability to express themselves. A lot of times I refer to it in my life as the 3 Ds of disability. And this happens so much out in the real world. Okay. I have to first declare my disability, then I have to define it. And oftentimes I have to defend my disability and my needs. And so for instance, like I said, I used the grocery store example, but before, I go to the grocery store, and it doesn't happen as often now because I use a service dog. but for those of you out there with hidden disabilities, invisible disabilities, I'm looking at you right now, because a lot of times we have to go out there and say, hey, I've got, this issue, and it's whether you or not you want to self-disclose. So when I'm at the grocery store, they expect me to just be able to swipe that card and do all the things. And I have to say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm blind, so there I am, I'm declaring it. And then I have to define, I can't see this screen. So what I need you to do is just let me run this as a credit instead of a debit, simple little adjustments. But sometimes, you get into a position where you have to defend it. And this might happen when you're requesting some more complicated accommodations. So again, those are my 3Ds. Feel free to use that: declare, define, defend, because that's part of the world of disability. That is a soft skill of getting out there and, owning your disability and not being ashamed of it.
And it gets better with time typically as well. So
you get so much more comfortable with it. I know that was my case. And again, my disability happened later in life. Many of these kids have grown up with it and they're so comfortable with who they are. It's fantastic. So we learn lessons from these kids. So again, it's, everything's case specific. Absolutely.
Yes. All right. So we touched on it briefly, but just instruction and self-advocacy. So self-determination, peer mentoring with people who are similar age or disability, careers, adult mentoring, and group mentoring, understanding your own disability disclosure and decision-making, knowing your rights and responsibility, positive self-talk, student-led IEPs, self-awareness, and monitoring progress and workplace accommodations, and becoming a self-advocate.
Yeah, so clearly I jumped the gun on that slide a little bit. I gave my speech beforehand, but again, that's what I was talking about. Just, being comfortable in disclosing when you feel it's appropriate. And that may come up later, about when you don't have to disclose your disability when applying for a job. But if you want an accommodation, then clearly you're going to have to use those 3Ds: declare, define, defend, for what you need. So yeah, it's, again, self-advocacy is so important. By the way, we have a self-advocate on staff at Disability Rights Arkansas. So anyhow, that we know that's important, and we know those things need to be facilitated.
And I like the one about people with similar disabilities as well. Just talking to someone who's done it before that has your same challenges. It really is helpful. And I love having those conversations with new injuries. And whenever I had a new injury, having people come in and talk me through things as well. So
yes, I think in the disability community at large, I think we do have a brotherhood and a sisterhood. But when you can connect with people with your specific disabilities, it's so much more important. And we always laugh as my family. And of course, I have 2 teenagers, so it's to the point that I'm probably embarrassing them. But it's kind of hard for blind people to spot other blind people. So, we kind of feel like we're not out there in the community unless we already know each other. So my kids know that when I say spot another blind person in the wild, that I'm like, oh my gosh, did you just see someone who's blind? Take me to them. We need to connect. We need to talk. Because it's great. Those relationships are so important. So make sure your kid's involved. Those some of my closest friends I have made since I became blind, and they inspire me every day.
same with me with people in chairs too. I kind of hunt them down. So
yeah, we might have a reputation out in the larger community. I don't know, but
it's possible. All right, so the discovery process. So just completing a supported employment assessment and providing community experiences to create a plan that can lead to better job matches that support increased independence at the workplace, using your job shadows, your temporary work experiences, and business tours. So this is kind of more of what we've already talked about and just different options that you can go with there. And document what works well and what challenges. From the classroom to the community experience. I think that's a good idea as well. So that way, it's working and it's not working, and you can improvise after that.
Yeah, I think everyone has had a job that it wasn't a good fit. I mean, it's not going to be any different within, the disabled population. There's going to be things that aren't a good fit. So don't look at that as a bad thing. Just say, okay, well, it didn't work. Let's look at what does work. So be positive.
So employer engagement. So look at the targeted job markets in your community that best match your students' profile. Networking skills are an important part of developing relationships with local businesses. Engaging employers requires making contacts from a business perspective, using business jargon, business concepts, and approach and selling your added expertise in helping the company meet their business hiring needs. So it doesn't just need to be that they're doing you a favor by hiring these students, but you need to offer value to the employee or to the employer as well with these students. You can just show them how it's going to benefit their company as well by having these students employed as well. So you're offering an untapped labor pool of qualified pre-screened candidates. You offer work incentives provided by VR and the Federal Work Opportunities Tax Credit as well.
So yeah, clearly this is targeted to those people on the transition team, those who are responsible for going out there and building those business relationships and paving the way for these students to have these work experiences. So yeah, these are just some great tips for getting out there. And again, it's hard without someone paving the way a little bit. So go do a service to these kids. These relationships will pay off in the long run.
Systematic instruction. So train paraprofessionals to support your students in community employment. Task analysis of the job duties with a plan to provide instruction or establish ways to adapt the task as needed. Document the work completed by the student and where additional instruction is required. Provide tools to assist the student in completing their task as independently as possible. Support the coworkers to provide instruction and feedback to the students. And include those soft skills reminders for students to reinforce their work ethic, hygiene, reliability, and monitoring quality and quantity of work.
Yeah, and again, this is just analysis and assessment of those work experiences. Again, this is where you're finding out what extra supports might be needed or what supports can be taken away. Again, this is all part of looking at the greater picture and making sure that everything's in place for whatever they want to do in the future.
So, and the bottom line on that is just that these pre-employment transition services lead to competitive integrated employment.
And keep in mind, just because it's a work experience doesn't mean we're pulling post-secondary education off the table. This is saying, okay, we know they succeeded at this. Let's get them into an education plan that could take it even further. So, just because you have a high school job doesn't mean you're not going to go to college after high school. Okay. So again, leave those pathways open and wide, so the student can determine what they want to do.
And then once they get a job, don't just leave them there. So we got to provide ongoing support for these students. So maintaining communication with the employer and the coworkers, return to provide retraining when needed, clearly define the expectations of the job, timeliness, appropriate attire, your breaks, quality and quantity standards to ensure understanding with the employer, students, and their families, and continue to learn about the students' interests and skills through their work experience. So just keep an ongoing dialogue with everyone involved, basically.
Yeah, that one's, again, I think it just further goes on to say that, things change. We're constantly, evolving. So if I had not evolved since high school, I would still be selling shoes at a small shoe store. So again, just, keep them in the forefront and plan with them as they change.
I would be a bank teller. That was fun. So, all right, school transition best practices. So early career exploration activities using a variety of assessment tools, student engagement in the transition planning, family engagement and participation in the transition planning. Both of those need to be involved. Introducing students and their families to their Voc Rehab and their community providers. So make those introductions, let them know who each other are so they can be using them because those are going to be the people that they're going to be relying on throughout their life and their careers. So provide opportunities to get direct experience through the job shadows, internships, paid jobs, and community service.
Yeah, again, these are best practices. These are things to do. Just go out there, make sure that you're on each other's radar. Okay. So that, again, I've often said it's a circuitous pipeline. So make the contacts, have that kind of Rolodex of information of, okay, these are the people that I'm going to need at these times in my life and as I grow. So yeah, make sure as you're planning the transition, if they're not on the team yet, they're on the radar to be included shortly.
Yes. All right. Other transition programs such as Project Search. So this is more for students with intellectual or cognitive disabilities. Their final year of high school, students are in a classroom within the business, full immersion in the business, completing 3 to 4 rotations, internships within the company to learn job skills in real world setting and to gain confidence. Looking at your Social Security benefits in the Red Book provided by Social Security, and then also looking into ABLE accounts so that students can, or people with disabilities can actually save money that they'll be able to use without losing benefits in the process.
Yeah, these are all great sources. When you go back to Project Search, that's when we're looking at supported employment. We didn't talk about that too much, but supported employment gets those job coaches in there to really work on the job and get these students really established, and then hopefully gradually pull out and let the natural supports within the workplace take over so that the students are comfortable. It's not a sink or swim thing. Supported employment is a great option, especially when you're talking about students with a variety of developmental disabilities, really, that could use those supports just to gain that confidence and get their feet wet and then hopefully have a successful job experience. Yes. Always keep benefits in mind, make sure that you're working with working incentives coordinators with Social Security. The Red Book is Social Security publishes that, and it's basically, an explanation of, what work could do to your benefits. So yes, that's important to keep in mind. Absolutely.
All right, and then the vocational rehab transition best practices. So meeting students at least 2 years before they graduate. So part of the reason this is important is you never know exactly when a student's going to graduate. You want to get some time in there to be able to build that relationship. But whenever you're looking at, the possibility that a kid might drop out of school and never get that link in with vocational rehab services there, but it provides rapid engagement of services. You can have office hours at the school. You need to be convenient for your families. Have a specific transition or pre-ETS coordinator in your state. So someone who does this and knows exactly what they're talking about with pre-ETS and what they need to provide. Coordinating the IEP, the PTP, and individual plan for the IPE for the student. There's throwing a bunch of letters out there for you again. Providing summer work experiences and providing support for on the job for after school, weekend, and summer jobs.
Yeah, it's a lot. And Voc Rehab Counselors they are so important. Y'all, I wouldn't be here without the fact that I had a phenomenal Voc Rehab Counselor. She got me through, onset of disability and believed me and pushed me when I didn't think I could do things. So Voc Rehab Counselors are super important. Don't underestimate, the power they have, the assistance they can provide. So, I wouldn't be here without one. So they need to be at the table. They provide a fabulous service.
And again, 15% of their budget is going here. So they've got the funds to support it as well.
Right.
All right. So WINTAC is the Workforce Innovation Technical Assistance Center. It's a technical assistance center for the Department of Education in DC to disseminate information about WIOA. They can work together with state vocational rehab agencies and their partners to effectively implement the requirements of the WIOA. So just to let you know that they're out there as well.
Yeah, and again, use the internet. That there's so much out there. We're constantly learning. Things change. Assistive technology also, if you've got students that are going to need assistive tech, that landscape is constantly changing. So do your research, encourage your student to do their research, being informed. If we talk about best practices, be informed. That's the best advice I can get, and reach out. Don't try and go it alone. I went alone. I tried to do it alone for far too long. And again, the resources, the people are out there, so reach out. You don't have to do it by yourself, and try and stay as informed as possible.
Yes. So, and transition doesn't just end with high school. So, and this is a misconception. Often people think that they can have an IEP in college. So your IEP doesn't go with you to college, but there is a disability resource center on campus that should be able to help with accommodations and be able to help to kind of fill in some of the gaps that not having an IEP can do for you there. And also there's no age cap on services that can be provided by vocational rehab.
Right. Although the transition years end, like Jen and I, we were past the age of transition when our disabilities occurred, but we were still able to receive very, very valuable services and support to achieve vocational goals from Voc Rehab. So if you're watching this and you're like, well, this was not for me, I'm not in high school, I'm not in college, there are still services out there to help you. If you have a vocational goal and your disability is presenting a barrier to that goal, you need to reach out to Voc Rehab.
And WIOA expanded those services as well. That's just not what we focused on here today.
Right.
Well, some additional resources that are out there. Those will be in the slides. And any questions?
We have one from Brittany. Are there any resources other than ARS for adults newly diagnosed with a disability to assist with transitioning their career and day-to-day lifestyle?
You want me to take it, Jen, or you want to?
Go ahead.
Okay. I mean, typically we would say reach out to ARS. It also could be disability specific. Of course, I'm blind. The Division of Services for the Blind is who handled my case. There are other agencies that do provide some support services. The Centers for Independent Living Skills, those are out there. So we call them the CILS. So depending on where you are in the state, you would check your geographic area for that. So it would honestly depend on what you're looking for and what kind of supports you're needing as your disability is impacting your life, and how you're looking to basically accommodate or change the situation that you're in.
With any other questions out there? Well, it looks like y'all really covered your stuff, or they are really soaking it in.
Or we put you to sleep, and for that, we're sorry.
I, as the moderator, truly enjoyed the presentation. You had some great feedback in there from Rodney and Chris as well. Looks like they have some good resources. In addition, I've directed them to the community board as well to share some of that information. So yeah, Jen, Molly, thank you so much today. We really enjoyed this presentation. On your slides, is this something that we can link in your session so that participants can view these later?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. We'll get those slides linked to the session so that you guys can see them later. We do want to sorry, my screen decided of all times to freeze on me. We do want to thank our sponsors for helping us make the 2021 DRA conference possible. And then we just also want to thank you attendees for joining us on this Friday. I know it's a little gloomy out there, but we appreciate you taking your time to spend on this session. We've got a few more this afternoon, and then we have a wonderful closing session for you. We hope you join us, and that is all we have. That concludes the webinar. Thank you all for joining.
Thanks so much, everyone.